Manifold day today. So I got the manifold up. I'm going to show you how to install these gaskets. So I found it, for me, the easiest thing, no gaskets. Put the manifold up, start all 8 bolts. Bottom bolts, which I'm going to leave in, turn them in a couple of turns, just a turn or so on the top. And by having them all in, when you take one bolt out to do it, I'm just like, say I got this one bolt out, keeps the manifold nice and aligned, so you're not fighting trying to find a third hand because you need to lift the manifold to get the bolt started while you hang on to this so it doesn't fall on the ground. So there's the bolt. Feed it in, whichever side's most convenient. You want to make sure, you probably can't see this, but this way here, my thumb and index finger are on the gasket. I can move it back and forth. You might just see that bolt moving. I know that it's centered on the bolt. It looks pretty good. Get this one in. Get it started. It's really easy to cross thread these bolts in this aluminum head, so you want to be really careful about that. So now nothing left to do but tighten them all up. So sort of run them down so they all touch, and then probably 2 passes to tighten everything down. I use my power ratchet to run them in because it's hard to get in there, and this is easy, but just be really careful that you don't crank them in this first time around. You want to get everything even before you tighten everything up. So much easier on these ones with all this tight space. You don't have to worry about enough room to swing the ratchet. And there's 2 of them I'm probably going to have to get from underneath because I did earlier. That very last bolt on the back on the bottom, you can't get to it from here, but it's dead easy underneath. This is really nice. This one, number 5 cylinder on the bottom, it's really hidden. It's like the manifold is cupped around the bolt, so it's difficult to even get your fingers in there. I got the bolt started from underneath, but it was tough. I'm not sure this is going to go in there either, but we'll see. Hopefully you can see this. It's kind of hard to get the camera down here. So that's the bolt there. Too tight to turn by hand, and oh, okay. The one above, where I left you last, was too tight to turn by hand, but it was not tight enough to make the ratchets work. So it was put the ratchet on, turn it in, take the ratchet off, put the ratchet on. Ugh. Alright, so everything up top is already pretty snug, so this is, I can go ahead and tighten that to the torque that I want. And that's good. I kind of wished I'd had the camera running. Remember when I tightened down the first 2 bolts near the radiator end, they looked like the power ratchet acted like they were snug. But when I went back to them, they were loose because the manifold was crooked and it was just jamming up. So that's the one I just did. This is the one that's really tough. This piece of manifold here, that bolt is actually down just behind this. This is really thin right here, but nonetheless it's there, so you can't get to it from down here at all. And from the top, the master cylinder's there, and the frame rail, the top of the frame rail is about halfway through the hex head, so it's just tough to get to. This is the cover off of the bell housing from the Type 35 bore Warner. It's actually a fairly close match. It's what we need for the new bell housing, but the edge down here in a couple of spots different. So I'm going to use this as a template. This part is still all correct because this is on the motor side, so that didn't change. So I'm going to trace that for starters. I have a rolling pinch roller for putting steps in, and I've often done devices like this, but I've never tried to raise the center like that. And I don't know if that's going to change the angle of the stretch or not, to be honest. So we'll just have to try and see what happens. This will be a first. I've never tried putting this deep a jog in and holding a dimension. My guess is that it's going to shrink it in, but it'll shrink it in this way, because that's the way we're going to bend it. So this is the basic outline of the piece that we had. This is just an arc 1 inch in, which should be able to clean up, clear all that stuff. These are the tabs that get folded over later. So, without any further ado, let's see if this will work. My friend Steve set his up with an electric motor, and I can really see the advantage of that, because it is difficult to turn this thing with one hand, and it's jiggling around from that, and follow the line of the piece. It's hanging out of one hand, and as your vision keeps going away because the handle's so long, can't really see all the way, and it's not helping it. Right there, the sun's blaring back at my face. So I need a nice big shade tree. Well, there it is. There's the first piece. So it does seem to have pulled a little bit, so you probably can see that it's got a bit of a bump there, but made a pretty good step. So we'll go trial fit that and see where we go from here. Well, I think we're pretty successful. That's a pretty tight fit. So this is the one that came off of the Type 35. So the next thing to do, we need to nip out these corners, and then across the center section and make that fold. And I want to do that before I cut these bits off, because this is only about a 1/16 of an inch and it'd be awful hard to get a hold of. So I'm just thinking I could use just some tin snips on this. You know, I love Harbor Freight, but when it comes to sheet metal clips, WISE. W-I-S-S. Harbor Freight ones, they might be good for aluminum or something, but you start doing tough stuff like that, you're going to have nothing but aggravation. Alright, so I'll have to go set up my makeshift sheet metal brake, which is my big vise and a couple of pieces of angle iron. Okay, so we made the first bend. I did in the big vise in the garage, which is not a lot of space around here, so you guys didn't get to see that. This vise on this cabinet is just really, I don't trust it to be really strong to be hitting on it with a hammer and stuff, because it's just a convenience thing. Anyway, there's the first bend. You see, fits up to that pretty well. Now we need to trim these edges a bit to once I get that trimmed off, I can check the fit against the car before I go too much further. But so far it looks pretty good. Right now you can't get it up in there because the oil pan hits in this section. Alright, so that's that bit. I'm going to clean that up on the big vise with a hammer a little bit. Take a follow the edge so I don't freaking rip it. So I tried it up against the motor. It's a nice tight fit while it was there. Described the shape of the transmission on the back, so I don't have to use my cardboard cutout. So now I should just kind of rough this out. We're going to need to drill holes on a bunch of other stuff too eventually here. I drew this just a tiny bit oversized because I want to be able to roll the edge a little bit. There we go. Roughed out. Still need to flatten it, drill the holes, smooth the edges. Got the step in there really well. It worked out even better than I thought it would. One other thing I want to do, this one has these rounded shapes, and I've got a die for that too, so I'll probably put those in there. Maybe we can take a picture of that later. Alright, so put the rounded rollers in instead of the step ones. Got this in here, and this is all loose, so once that's there, I've got some guidelines just traced onto the metal. Nothing too fancy because they're not exactly super accurate on this. But you need to tighten this up to set the depth of the die, because to get it in, it's obviously with this loose and floating around. So this is actually making a dimple as we do this. And it feels like it's touched to itself. And it's just a matter of rolling it in. Alright, well there you have it. Two nice ridges. Means this plate is nice and rigid in this direction now. I mean, not as nice as the original, but not bad for, you know, a guy working in his backyard. Alright, so I think that's probably about it for today. So tomorrow we'll clean this up a bit more, see about drilling some holes, and see if we can't fit it into place. We'll see you then. So we're going to be able to make up for the thickness of the metal because one's stepped in the other, so I'm going to punch this just a little bit off center to try to make up for that. Okay, so I've got it bolted up through the two top mounts that go into the engine, clamped it in place. Now I'm just using this long thin punch to go through these small holes and just marking the face of this tin. You should be able to see here, there are the marks I just made with the punch. So we should be able to drill that now. There's a few of these holes that are blind, that they just go into the casting. So to mark them, I cut the end of a head of a bolt off that fits the threads. I've done it to a point, so it's this one, and that one. We'll do those later. So I need to put the piece of sheet metal back up, and then I'll just tap it with a hammer to mark it. Okay, so we got all the holes drilled. slightly oversized so that any variations are made up readily. I suppose if there's anything that's really wrong, you know, it's file an edge. Because it's just, there's like 8 screws holding on this quarter-pound of sheet metal. Not exactly a highly stressed thing. So the last thing I want to do, I want to curl this edge a little bit like an oil pan or anything else would be. So these long straight parts, I just did those on the jaw of the vise, but now I've got these rounder sections. So I just found a socket that's about the radius that I want, and just go in, knock that down a little bit. It's surprising how easy this is. I always think it's tough to shrink metal, but this actually goes pretty well. So you can see the big one I just did here. These started. Need to go flat sections back on these. But anyway, you get the idea. Alright, so there it is. So still need to clean this up with some lacquer thinner, and want to paint it up. So, like I say, it's not as good as when you're going to get from the factory. But hey, trying to find one of these, because the guys at the junkyard, there's probably 1 million of them buried in the mud. But they all just toss them away, don't bother, because, the car they're going to put the new transmission in has got this already. So, anyway, there it is. Alright, so there it is. Painted, all bolted down tight, all shiny and pretty. So I had to, all the holes lined up, except for that one. It's just off the tiniest bit. It just took a small needle file, cleaned it out, the bolt went in, no problems. Well, that's it. And the other good news is I just tried laying the exhaust up, and it looks like it's going to fit no problem too. Because there are some people on the internet said that the exhaust wouldn't go when you did this, so we'll see. Here's a better view of that transmission mount that we made the blocks up for the other day. You see both of them right there. So, looking good. So, guess we start her and get some wiring to do. I really wish I had the other side of this plug, but I don't. So I'll probably just cut it off. These are the original wires here. I'll probably just make up some ends and plug them together. That's the neutral safety switch and the reverse lamps.